Now to the cover story of this week's magazine. Journalist Ian Williams takes a detailed look at the cosy relationship between Cambridge University and the Chinese Communist Party, arguing that China has bought the university. To make his case, he joins the show now, and we're also joined by Professor Kerry Brown, Director of the Lau China Institute at King's College London. Ian, can you explain what's happened between Cambridge and China?
Yeah, the biggest project that Cambridge has out, the international project, is a joint venture with Nanjing Municipal Authority in China, which is described as a smart cities research centre. This was signed in 2019 and has been valued by Cambridge at £10 million. Now, this is, we are told, research into the bold new technology that will make cities more livable going forward, sensors that will determine everything from when your rubbish needs to be cleared through to the flow of traffic. Now, certainly this may happen, and it may well be that the brave urban centres of the future are fully connected, but in Chinese terms, smart cities are called safe cities, and it's inextricably linked with surveillance technology, security and repression, epitomised by what's happening in Xinjiang. And to me, it's incredibly naive that Cambridge can pursue what is the biggest project of its type and the only one which has its name in a technology which in the Chinese terms is contributing to the surveillance state and to repression in that country. The contract itself was celebrated by the oversight people at Cambridge, whose job it is to examine these sorts of deals as just the sort of relationship that Cambridge needed going forward now that Britain has left the European Union. And there seemed to be no serious discussion about how this technology could be contained and how technology which is clearly dual use could be prevented from being used repressively, as it has been quite widely within China.
Kerry, what do you think? Is all of this above board or not?
Well, the first thing I have to say is I'm a graduate at Cambridge, so I have to declare that interest. The second is I have known the Institute at Jesus College, and I've spoken there, and I've known Peter Nolan for 25 years. And his interest in, kind of China's politics and his, kind of sympathy, I suppose, is not a new thing. It's been around for 25 years. I mean, Cambridge University's governance has been highly secretive for 700 years. And I have to say that there's one organisation on the planet that is more opaque than the Communist Party of China. That's Cambridge University. So, I mean, I think that's one of the issues. The second, associated issue is that I think, it's right for Ian to raise these concerns. The issue really, though, is that, of course, British universities generally, and for quite some time, have needed to be very entrepreneurial. The London School of Economics got into terrible problems with Gaddafi in the, kind of early 2000s. And one of the issues is, on the one hand, we have a government that tells us, go raise money, be entrepreneurial post-Brexit. On the other, we are kind of told we'll be terribly careful with the world's second biggest economy, even though there may be very important alignments. Those alignments are really, really crucial too. Public health, environment. These are not issues where China needs to be opaque or anyone needs to be opaque, because we all seem to now know what we're dealing with. And I think it's really important to maintain lines of engagement. I look upon it as, it's probably problematic that you might have parts of British universities that need to have engagement and dialogue with parts of the Chinese entity and state that are problematic. But I think that engagement needs to go ahead. And I think that it is relatively low risk. The issue is that Jesus College, through one of these China centres, is doing engagement in an area which is difficult. It's well observed. It's being watched by journalists and observers. And I don't see it as quite as grave an issue as buying a whole university. The final thing I have to say is that the Xinjiang issue is a serious and important issue. I don't deny that. That is not, however, the situation in other areas of China. The problem really is that for the Chinese middle class, who are absolutely crucial to the Xi Jinping leadership, their views too are often public opinion, as far as we can see from what evidence anecdotally and also in terms of kind of surveys, were pretty supportive of maybe even more extreme positions. And so we can't just blame one organisation for this. The Communist Party of China can take some of the flat for sure, and should take some of the flat, but it is not as simple as just saying that organisation is the only problem. It's much more complicated.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, Kerry, because you touched on a lot of the things that I want to touch on in this conversation in general. Ian, just starting with one of the factors, which is that surely some engagement with China, especially on a research basis, has to be done. For one, there are some research that is just a bit more innocuous, for example, climate. You mentioned this Renewable Energies Institute that Cambridge also has a partnership with China on, and especially on a material basis. If the government is going to be cutting research funding, and Stephen Toop, the Vice Chancellor of Cambridge himself, has campaigned to not against these research cuts, then they've got to get their money somewhere for our STEM subjects. So what do you say to that?
They have, but I think it needs to be transparent and it needs to be open and it needs to be debated. And as Kerry pointed out, too often, and we're seeing this with Cambridge, that this has not been the case. And they preferred to avoid any sort of discussion or sweep these sort of arguments under the table. I mean, two examples I used in the article was the engineering department at Cambridge that signed this quantum computer deal with Tencent, the owner of WeChat. And the blurb on the engineering department website, I checked it, it was not only termed in ways which would justify from a WeChat point of view, but it was lifted from the WeChat website. Likewise, I think with the institutes at Jesus College, when they were first set up, which was in the wake of the golden era of Cameron and Osborne, which was very much like a starting gun for everyone to go chasing after Chinese money, almost no questions asked. The language on their websites was also lifted almost word for word from Communist Party documentation, from propaganda. And I do accept that there is the need for engagement, but I think it has to be done in an open and transparent way. I mean, the example I made in the piece, the Sustainability Leadership Centre in Cambridge, the refurbishment of the old post office. Now, this is a very important issue, renewable energy, but half of the almost £13 million cost of that refurbishment is being met by a Chinese entrepreneur. Now, nowhere in the literature put forward by Cambridge, the glowing description of this particular character, does it mention that he's a member of the Chinese Parliament and a Communist Party advisory group. And indeed, when the deal was being signed on this centre, this same body, the MPC, was busy passing a law that effectively shut down the remnants of democracy in Hong Kong. And surely we should know that Cambridge is not just getting money from a billionaire who is into renewable energy, which is, commendable though that might be, but it is also accepting money from somebody who is a party to repression in Hong Kong. And I think if that were known, a lot of people may feel rather less comfortable about it.
Kerry, Ian mentions, entrepreneurs and companies like Tencent, who are primarily tech companies, and WeChat is a social media platform, as well as the CCP. Do you think that any money that comes from China can ever be clean in the way that we would like it to be, given just how interventionist the Communist Party is in everyday life in China?
I mean, money coming from anywhere is going to be problematic. What's clean money? I mean, that's an interesting concept to me.
It must be a relative term. There must be more money that's cleaner than others.
Well, if you say that China is problematic because of lack of transparency, because of entrepreneurs being deeply linked to the party state, and I mean, that's true. I mean, we cannot deny that, there are links, although I think they're complicated and not straightforward. You then have to say, okay, we don't deal with China, period. You can't have an intermediary position. You either deal or you don't deal. And my point is that maybe The only big disagreement I have with Ian's analysis, I suppose, is that I don't think we can do much about the problem there. China has many other places to look at and many other things to do. It is on its way to being the world's biggest economy, and that looks most unlikely not to stop. For us, it's going to be a really interesting question about organisations like Cambridge University that prioritise, rightly, the freedom of their associated institutions, colleges and different departments, who will, if we want the level of transparency that Ian's alluding to, they're going to have to radically change the way that they communicate with each other, the way that they deal with each other. Cambridge University, as an institution, cannot really do much about what a college institution like the China Centre does. That's its autonomy, that's its freedom, that's what's been the case for 700 years. And so if you want to change that, you have to change the governance of Cambridge University to have that openness. The problem is here. It's not really in China on that at that level. And I don't really know how you do that, because their autonomy is really important for themselves. The issue that China has raised is really more for us to deal with within ourselves. And it's going to be a very, very tough thing, because in essence, what you're going to end up arguing is we are needing to be more subject to regulations and rules and government interference because of China, which is a very interesting thing, that China, the great surveillance problem, means that we then surveil ourselves much more. Well, that's win-win for China, I guess.
Ian, what do you think?
Well, I think it just needs more rigorous oversight. I don't necessarily would characterize it that way. But what I would say is that there is a contrast, that when you look at a lot of the research that China is keen on and is supporting and is keen to be part of in the UK, China targets quite clearly. I mean, it knows what it needs and what it wants, and is what is going to be useful to it, what it lacks at home. And I think it is quite calculating and it is quite targeted. And it sees in an institution like Cambridge an organisation which alludes to all these ideas of academic freedom, is also acting like a commercial entity, and it's very good at taking advantage of that. I think that China has been very smart. It knows what it wants out of these relationships and it goes after it. And I think that sometimes when I talk about naivety in academia, I don't think a lot of these institutions fully appreciate just how good China is at this, and just how calculating they can be when there is a piece of research or a piece of technology or a relationship that they want to develop. And I think that sometimes in these institutions, these colleges, they don't really know what they're dealing with.
Well, just to push back there, though, from what you said, it seems it's pretty clear what they're looking for, that you've got an understanding of it, and it'll be pretty easy, therefore, to deal with this and just say, here are the areas of risk, be careful about those, and other areas engage. I mean, I think this sounds very soluble.
It should be. I think you're right.
For you, what are the areas of engagement and what are the areas of risk? Because as Kerry says, a lot of money from China is inextricably linked to the Chinese Communist Party. So if that link in and of itself makes the money unacceptable, compromising, where are the areas in which you can accept Chinese partnership or money or research?
I think there are areas that Kerry mentioned, like climate change, like clean energy, a lot of areas where there are mutual concern. But I would start from a position of extreme skepticism when I'm examining some of this proposed investments and some of these proposed link-ups. I mean, don't forget, we're dealing with a situation here where, it's not a question of will some of this or could some of this technology end up being used for military or repressive purposes. By law, civilian developments must be used or must be made available to the security state. There are several laws which mandate this. It's not so much will it happen, it has to happen by law. And I think I would start from a position of extreme skepticism. Yes, there are areas where we need to cooperate. And yes, universities are businesses that are in need of money. But I would start with a very skeptical approach. But I do accept, as Kerry was saying, that it should be not easy, but it shouldn't be difficult to lay out parameters as to what should be allowed and what should not be allowed. But there are at the same time a lot of grey areas.
Kerry, do you think this is a problem facing other universities in the UK and indeed around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we as universities obviously are going into a very uncertain economic climate with lots of issues. European students, it's not going to be easy for them to come to the UK because of Brexit. That's just a fact. And Chinese students are coming in greater numbers. And, that is important to remember. I think those Chinese students are coming for purely educational reasons, but it means that universities are accused of, kind of doing things because they have so many, kind of interests from China. I think it's important to have consensus, though, through discussions like this on areas where it is permissible and good to engage with China. China is a technological innovator. It's something like $637 billion goes into research development a year, way more than probably the rest of the world. And it's going to increase 7%, I think, year on year for the next 5 years. Many of those areas maybe are very big problems. Artificial intelligence is a big problem. But the quandary is that China is going to be now producing, for the first time in modern history, really interesting technology that would probably help us hugely. And so we have to really think through the costs of saying, right, we're not going to deal with you here. It might be very right not to deal with China, for sure. I mean, I'm not saying we should, but there will be more and more opportunity costs. And in environment, I think China, we have to work with China. We have to have universities work with China. And I think the final thing I'll say is that some of the charming brand building that some of our politicians have been going in, about beating up China and all this stuff, I don't know. They obviously haven't thought through this very deeply because it's not straightforward. I think Ian's right. There's areas where we've got to work. There's areas where we can't work. We need an honest, transparent debate with ourselves about where those areas are. And then I think we'll be okay.
And finally, Ian, how much of it is down to the British government to do in terms of whether or not providing more STEM funding so that China doesn't have to be there to fill in the gaps on technological research, or in terms of education about China? We hear a lot about Confucius Institutes, which are highly controversial, but I see very little else places that young, bright students can go to study Chinese or learn about China if it is not with a Chinese-sponsored place. So, maybe should the British government be doing better on that point?
I think they could be doing a lot better because we haven't really had, there's talk about guidelines for universities, guidelines for research, but I still see a very confused China policy coming out of this government. It doesn't really know what it wants. This is from everything from where we want to condemn, we want to talk out politically, but it should be business and investment as usual. Well, I'm not convinced you can separate that, but you could also extend that into the university sector. We see a lot of statements coming out of government about the need to look more closely at cooperation and collaboration with China, but we don't hear a lot about where other sources of funding might come from, where other means of, as you the example you cite of learning about the Chinese language outside of Confucius Institutes. So it's not a very joined up policy. We do hear a lot about what they don't want. As Kerry said, there is a lot of rhetoric comes out, but I wouldn't describe it particularly as a policy.
Ian Williams and Kerry Brown, thanks for joining Spectator TV. Now, to read articles like Ian Williams's every week, you can pick up the issue of The Spectator or get a subscription for it. You can get 12 weeks of The Spectator for just £12 if you go to spectator.co.uk/TV offer. And remember, we'll also throw in that £20 Amazon gift voucher. And if you enjoy this episode of Spectator TV, why not subscribe to our YouTube channel for free so you never miss an episode? Just click the subscribe button at the bottom of this video and the bell icon to make sure. Thanks for watching, and do join us again next week when football will have come home.